Welcome to another Regulatory Exam 1 video. This is going to be quite a long video in comparison to the others, but it is going to be an important one. We've got 28 slides to cover during this session. So I'll just start with a quick RE5 recap just to make sure that we still remember and understand everything. We'll start with the role players. We also have a video explaining all of the role players in detail, so I'm not going to go into too much detail now. Just a reminder of our different role players. So we normally start off with our first building, which is the FSCA, the enforcing institution of the FACE legislation. This is the building that basically regulates the financial services environment. This is where all the rules are decided on and implemented and enforced throughout the industry. But we know the old tale of the building cannot do anything, so we need someone in charge of the building, which is the commissioner. So the commissioner is supposed to make sure that everything that the building is supposed to achieve, according to law, is actually achieved. So he's the face of the building. In the exam and in your studies, when we refer to the FSCA, the authority, or the commissioner, we were actually referring to the same thing, same person. Right, just a reminder that in our FSCA, we have 4 different departments. We have the registration department, the supervision department, the enforcement department, and the compliance department. All of these departments assist the Commissioner in reaching the objectives of the FSCA. Our next building is a building that has to comply with FACE, and this is our financial service provider. We'll talk about their fit and proper status in a second because it is important for everyone to know that. In this building, we also need a face of the building, which is the key individual, the guy with the sword that protects the FSB license. 2 magic words: manage and oversee. They manage and oversee all of the FACE-related business. And then we have our money maker, the representative, the best guy in the FSB environment because they have the littlest of responsibilities and they get to make good commissions. So our rep, our money maker, either employed or mandated by the FSB to represent the FSB. We then have our compliance officer, our snitch, which we'll also talk a bit about more in this class. And then our last one is the phase ombud. Those are our different role players. So do make sure that you understand all of these different role players and their roles and responsibilities. If you don't, refer back to our role player video on your portal. Right, licensing recap, very important topic for RE1. As a key individual, it is your responsibility to make sure that all the licensing requirements are met. So with licensing, we start with the application process. So straightforward, we submit our application for the approval of a new FSB license to the FSCA. The commissioner will consider the application, might request additional information. He will then either refuse or grant the license. If it has been refused, he must give reasons for the refusal. And if it has been granted, he will issue the license with conditions and restrictions. Every single license will come with conditions and restrictions. Some are specific conditions that will be specific to this FSB, and others would be standard conditions. Our standard conditions, let's write that down. Standard conditions. We have 5 standard conditions. The 15-day rule. Any profile changes to the FSB must be communicated to the FSCA, the Commissioner, the authority, within 15 days of those changes. Profile changes will include anything like a name change, address, contact person, contact details. Any change that will not affect the license or the categories of license or the products approved under the license, but will change in the profile of the FSB, will count as a profile change. Next condition, we must have an approved key individual at all times. So there's absolutely no FSB that is allowed to render financial services without an approved key individual. We must keep a representative register where we keep the information of all representatives and all key individuals. And if we make any changes to this rep register, we have to submit the updated register to the FSCA within 15 days of any changes, regardless of how small the change is. Then, if we ever change our name, so 4th condition, if we change our FSB name, we need to request an amended license. And I'm saying the word amended in this tone because it's important. If it gives you the option to say that we have to request a new license, that is not the same as an amended license. Okay, so we don't need a new license, we just need an amended license. Still the same license, just with a change on it. And then last rule, we are only allowed to deal with products of authorized insurers and FSP. So if we have a product supplier and we'll sell a financial product on behalf of our product supplier, that product supplier must be a registered FSP. Standard conditions done. Right, then we have the different categories, category 1, 2, 2A, 3, and 4. There's also a video on our YouTube and on your portal on that, so let's not waste time revising that again. If you still struggle with that, I'll just refer you back to that video. After the different categories, we have the display rules. So the display rule says that when an FSP has an FSP license, a certified copy of the license must be displayed in a prominent and durable manner within every business premises of the FSP. A certified copy because the FSP will never be in possession of the original. We request as many certified copies as we need from the FSCA. In a prominent and durable manner means that it needs to be visible and safe from destruction and within every business premises, not just head offices and regional offices, all business premises. We have to make reference to this license on all business documentation, all advertisements, all promotional material. And then it says this license must either be available immediately or within a reasonable time for production when requested by a client. So if a client comes to my office and they say, okay, Yolandi, great. Where's your FSP license? Before I decide to purchase any product, I want to see your FSP license. I should be able to show it to them immediately. We then walk to wherever it is on display in our FSP office, and I'll show it to the client. All right, good. After that, after the display rules, we have undesirable business practices. Ooh. So undesirable business practices always very important for the exam, regardless of whether you're writing RE5 or RE1. They love asking questions about this because if you just downloaded the FASE Act, you probably wouldn't know about these undesirable business practices. Why? Because they're published in the Government Gazette. So the Commissioner publishes all undesirable business practices in the Government Gazette. Once it has been published, it is immediately a requirement for you to comply with the publication. If you do not agree with the undesirable business practice being published, you have 21 days to give a written response to it, but you still have to be compliant in the 21 days. So you don't get 21 days to comply, you have to comply immediately. Sometimes it happens that an FSP is unaware of a new undesirable business practice. Your snitch or your compliance officer will definitely report that to the FSCA. The FSCA will then grant the FSP 60 days to rectify any damages caused by continuing with the undesirable business practice. And if it is not fixed within those 60 days, we'll see it as a phase offense, which means the license will then either be suspended or withdrawn depending on the seriousness of the situation. So undesirable business practices currently, any business practice that will harm the relationship between the different role players. This includes, if there's an example in the exam when they say this business practice is likely to harm the relationship between the client and the FSP, it's still seen as the different role players. So don't think the client is not a role player. The client does not have to comply with phase, but the client still forms part and still is affected by phase. Right. Then so any practice that is likely to harm the relationship between different role players, any practice that will prejudice or discriminate against our clients, any practice that will unfairly affect the client or mislead or deceive the client. Undesirable business practice. We then have to also remind ourselves about the Medical Schemes Act and its relevance to FSPs. So if we're an FSP that will be selling health services benefits, so basically an FSP selling medical aid products, we need two licenses. We need our FSP license and accreditation under the Medical Schemes Act. So the requirements for these two licenses are exactly the same. If I require 10 blue balloons to get my FSP license, I require 10 blue balloons to get my accreditation under the Medical Schemes Act. If I need a key individual for one, I need a key individual for the other one. So because they're identical in the approval requirements, whatever happens to the one will happen to the other one. So if I do have my accreditation under the Medical Schemes Act, I will get my FSP license. If I get my FSP license and I'll be selling health services benefits, I will get my medical schemes accreditation. But if I lose the one, I also lose the other. And it doesn't matter which one I lost, I will still lose or forfeit the other one. So if I have my accreditation lapsed, then my FSP license will also lapse. If I had my FSP license suspended, my accreditation will also be suspended. So whatever happens to the one will also happen to the other one. Right. That takes us then to suspension, withdrawal, and lapsing. We have our burger. Top part is always withdrawal. Middle part, the base part of the burger, suspension. And then the bottom part is lapsing. Okay. So withdrawal, the entertaining part of the bun. This is very serious non-compliance. We'll see the owners of the FSP be debarred from applying for a new license. This is when we are on the covers of newspapers. People talk about us on the radio, and this is permanent. License is gone forever. Suspension is only temporary. So this is normally due to administrative non-compliance. It's serious because we are not compliant with phase, but we're not harming clients. We're not deceiving clients. We're not stealing from clients. We're not busy with anything corrupt or something funny. Right, so suspension, we can get our license back. It's temporary, normally because of administrative non-compliance. Lapsing. Lapsing also permanent. Even though we didn't do anything wrong, with lapsing we have no compliance issues. We didn't do anything wrong, but our license is gone forever. So this is normally if the FSP will no longer be offering financial products, so they're just forfeiting or voluntarily surrendering their license, or they're closing down completely, or if our FSP is a single owned FSP or a sole proprietor FSP, and this sole proprietor has died or is finally liquidated, finally sequestrated, not provisionally. Don't fall for that trick in the exam. So when our owner is finally liquidated, finally sequestrated, or the owner is permanently unable to continue with business due to mental or physical illness, okay, that's when our license will lapse. And then the last thing under lapsing is our penalties. So the phase penalties say it's up to 10 million rand or up to 10 years imprisonment or both. That was an or. Why does it look like a CV? There we go. Or both. Okay, in my last RE1 exam that I wrote, they just asked, what is the maximum monetary penalty under the FACE Act? And that was 10 million rand. So we have to look out when they ask you about the penalty, and they will ask you about the penalty, but when they ask you about the penalty, are they asking about the possibilities or the maximum? And then it can just get into a bit more detail. Are they asking about the maximum prison sentence or the maximum monetary penalty or both? Okay, just something to keep in mind when you read the question. Representatives also very important for RE1. Why? Because as a key individual, it is your responsibility to appoint representatives, to supervise them, or to appoint supervisors to supervise them, and then to debar them. Okay. So with the appointment, we have to make sure that they adhere to the fit and proper requirements, also referred to as Section 13 requirements. Okay. So this is where we look at their honesty and integrity. So remember, honesty and integrity, never negotiable. Has to be in order at all times. Then our competence. Competence, a bit negotiable because you can work under supervision while you gain competence. We have the experience requirements and then we have qualification requirements. We'll look at the experience requirements in a bit. Qualification requirements, we know the default ones where when we get a DOFA, our timeline starts and we have 3 months for product specific training. We have 12 months for class of business training. We have 24 months for our RE5 and then 6 years for our phase recognized qualification. Phase recognized qualification. So product specific training is the only one here that you will redo as new products get added or you change employers or whatever. But with each one of these, you get a certificate. And once you have all of your certificates, this rep has to comply with CPD requirements. And we have a whole video on the CPD calculations on the portal as well. So if you're still struggling with that, I'll refer you back to that video. Right. So it is possible that a representative still needs to gain the proper experience, but they already comply with all of the certificates. So they have to do CPD, even though they're still under supervision for experience purposes. Right. Little trick question that they like to put in there. We'll also in this video look at, in terms of the qualification, what the entry level requirements are. Okay, that's something that you did not have to know for RE5. Right, then after that, after competence, we have our CPD requirements that we touched on, and then we have operational ability. So for a representative, operational ability just refers to their physical ability to do the job. For FSPs and for key individuals, operational ability refers to something else, which we will discuss in this video as well. But for our rep, operational ability is just their ability to do the job. Can they do the job? Right. And then financial soundness. For our representatives, financial soundness is only a requirement for juristic representatives, not all representatives. Right. And this refers to the financial resources available. Right. So let me erase some of this because this is just the appointment part. We'll get into the supervision part in a second. So with supervision, remember the purpose of supervision is to allow representatives who are not yet competent to gain competence while working. And they're being supervised by someone that can assist them in becoming competent, someone that can assist them in getting the required experience, learning from that person. That person has to monitor them, has to coach them, has to mentor them in all ways. So with supervision, a very common question, and it is something that people do get confused about, is who can be a supervisor? And for some reason, we tend to think only key individuals, which is not true. So a representative can be a supervisor, a key individual can be a supervisor, and the FSP, if it's a natural person, can be a supervisor. The rule is just that this person must be completely competent, that's a C, in the same product categories that they will supervise in. So example, if we have a representative under supervision, so rep under supervision, for the product category short-term insurance personal lines, subcategory A1. Whoever is appointed as this person's supervisor must be fully compliant in the same product category. This is in class where we use the example when we say that a neurosurgeon cannot supervise a heart surgeon. Both of them surgeons, both of them doctors, but not the same kind of doctor. A dentist cannot supervise a lung specialist. Both doctors, not the same doctor. So if I'm a dentist, I can supervise another dentist. If I'm a neurosurgeon, I can supervise another neurosurgeon. Okay, so if I'm competent in short-term insurance personal lines A1, I can supervise short-term insurance personal lines A1. I can't supervise pension funds. Even though I'm a competent rep, I'm not competent in that product category. And the same counts for the key individual. The key individual must be competent in the same product categories that they will supervise for. The FSP, if it's a natural person, so this is when it's not an entity, same rule applies. Right. So with supervision, we need to have a supervision agreement with the representative. In the supervision agreement, we need to identify the supervisor. We need to set out the rules and functions, or the tasks and functions of this representative. Then what expertise, what skills, what knowledge requirements we have for them to competently perform those tasks and functions. We need to identify the training needs and set out a training program. We then have to also identify or set out the supervision arrangement. So how will this person be supervised? How intensively? How often? Which methods will be used? And then lastly, the sign-off criteria. What needs to be in place for this person to no longer work under supervision? Okay. Then after that, debarment. So I'll erase again. Debarment. Come. There we go. So debarment, what is the purpose of debarment? To prevent a representative in certain circumstances from rendering financial services due to either lack of honesty and integrity or lack of competence. So you did not get your qualification in time, or you are found guilty of an act of dishonesty, and for that reason you have been debarred. So with debarment, we have rules. The rules of debarment say that when we want to debar a representative, we need to make sure that the reasons for debarment became known to the key individual or FSP while this person was their representative. If they have left our FSB and we only became aware of the problems afterwards, we cannot debar that person anymore. We can report them to the FSCA, but we can't debar them because they're not our representative. We can't just debar people that are not on our rep register. Right. So if we find out about the reasons for debarment while this person was our rep, and then this person decides to resign with immediate effect or whatever once they became aware of the fact that we want to debar them, we have to conclude the debarment within 6 months after they have left. So as long as we became aware of the problems while they were our employee or our representative, we can still continue after they have left, but we have to conclude it within 6 months. If this representative just disappears, they're not responding to any of our requests or emails or anything like that, then we have to make sure that we just submitted the intention to debar them to their last known address, physical address, or email address. And if they do not respond within the given time frame, we can continue with the debarment without them being involved. So the process for debarment, next part, is that we first have to give them the letter of intent stating that we intend to debar them, what are the grounds of the debarment, and what other terms will be attached to the debarment. Then we need to provide them with the FSB's debarment policy and procedure. This is so that the rep understands what this debarment will mean, what the process would be like, and who's going to be involved. Then we need to give them the opportunity to respond, a reasonable opportunity to respond to this letter of intent. We then consider the response and make a final decision. And our last step is to inform them of the final decision immediately after that decision has been made. Once we have done that, we're done with the final decision, we have to inform the FSCA of the debarment within 5 days. Okay, so that's the debarment form that we completed in the workshop. So we have to send that debarment notification form within 5 days. We then have to submit evidence as to why we debarred this person within 15 days and our updated rep register where we've removed the name of this person within 15 days. Okay, so here we have a 5 days, 15 days, 15 days to remember. 5 days is just informing the FSCA by sending that notification letter. 15 days, evidence. 15 days, rep register. Right. After the debarment, the FSCA is not going to review the debarment. They're not going to approve it. You don't have to wait for them to sign off on it or anything like that. They just keep record of it. If this representative wants to appeal the debarment, they need to appeal with the Financial Services Tribunal. Right. And then the reappointment. If we debarred a representative due to lack of competence, so they did not get a qualification in time, we can reappoint them as soon as the qualification has been obtained. If we debar a representative due to lack of honesty and integrity, at least 12 months must pass before they can be reappointed. All of their unconcluded business must be concluded. All of their legal proceedings or complaints must be concluded, and then the fit and proper requirements must be met. So whichever FSB reappoints this representative must submit to the FSCA the following documents: an affidavit by the representative confirming that all of the requirements have been met, the FSB4 form for representatives, apologies, the FSB5 form, not the FSB4 form. I don't want to re-record this entire slide. So the FSB5 form. FSB4 form is for the approval of key individuals. So the FSB5 form for representatives must be completed and submitted to the FSCA to request that this person that we have previously debarred or that someone has previously debarred gets removed from the debarred rep register and added back to the normal central rep register. Okay, for our key individuals, manage and oversee. That's the first thing that I want you to see. Manage and oversee, and then you should also be thinking of this, the shield. Ooh, why is he not holding a shield? Okay, angry face, person that protects the license. So remember that they are responsible for anything and everything phase related. If the FSB loses their license because they were not compliant, it is going to be your fault, key individual's fault, because you have to implement policies and procedures to make sure that all the phase requirements have been met. You need to make sure that you meet the FSB meets the financial soundness requirements, all of the accounting and auditing requirements. We'll talk about the early warning signs in this slide or in this workshop as well. Complaints and the ombud. Complaints forms part of the code of conduct, very important. So there we need to know what the complaints management framework must consist of. We need to know the different categories of complaints. We need to look at the escalation and review process for exam purposes, common questions about that. With the ombud, we just know we need to know the jurisdiction of the ombud. So when will the ombud basically, I don't want to say approve, but accept a complaint, and when will he decline a complaint? Which determinations he's allowed to make, all of that. Okay. And then with FICA, it's just a language thing. So let's quickly recap on the language for FICA. FICA, we use the words accountable institution. We use the word due diligence. We use ongoing due diligence. We use additional due diligence. Come on. Why did the A move? There we go. We will then refer to a business relationship. We will also refer to a single transaction. And we will refer to a prospective client. So an accountable institution is an institution that has been seen as a high risk for money laundering activities or terrorist financing activities, and these are the institutions that need to comply with FICA. So all of our FSBs except for short-term insurers are seen as accountable institutions. Due diligence refers to identifying and verifying your client. So before we are allowed to conclude a transaction with any client, we need to identify and verify all of their particulars. Ongoing due diligence just means that we're not just going to identify and verify once. We will do it ongoingly. So this is where the banks would normally monitor all of your transactions. They monitor your account activities and things like that so that they can also pick up on anything that is irregular. And additional due diligence is if our client is a company and we need to identify and verify every person that forms part of this company to make sure that we can establish who the beneficial owner is. A business relationship, in the workshop I said to you, this is when we give our client a statement. So our client is going to return to us. It's not a once-off transaction, it's a continuous transaction. Where with a single transaction, we give the client an invoice. We don't give them a statement. We conclude a transaction, and if the same client does come back every day, he's going to get a new invoice every day. And then our prospective client is a potential client. So it's someone that's not my client yet. We are in the process of concluding a transaction, but we have not concluded it yet. So you'll read in your book that most of the sentences there start with, when an accountable institution engages with the prospective client to either enter into a business relationship or a single transaction, due diligence is required. Okay, so that whole sentence consists out of our FICA language key points. Okay, here we get to the actual class part. So fit and proper requirements for an FSB. They love asking this for key individual candidates. So very important. So we say the fit and proper requirements for our representative. We know about them, all of the honesty and integrity, all of this. So FSBs also have fit and proper requirements. All of the owners must comply with the personal characteristics of honesty and integrity. All of them. All of the owners, trustees, members, directors, whoever. Then our FSB has to comply with operational ability. But here it's not like with representatives when we said it's just their physical ability to do the job. Here it's a bit more intense. So operational ability for our FSB refers to the fact that they have a fixed address, the fact that they've got communication facilities and proper storage and filing systems in place. They must have a bank account with the registered bank, and they must have a key individual. Without any of these bullet points, our FSB is not fit and proper in terms of operational ability. Then the general competence requirements. If our FSB is a sole proprietor or a single owned FSB, so not a registered company, a one-man band, then this person has to comply with the adequate and appropriate skills, knowledge, and expertise in respect of the financial services being rendered. They need to comply with the experience and qualification requirements for that specific product category that they have been approved for. And they also need to maintain competence, which means that when new rules have been implemented, they need to comply with it. This sole proprietor would also have to comply with CPD and all of that. Our fit and proper requirements for key individuals: honesty and integrity, never negotiable. They must already meet the minimum experience requirements for that product category that they will act as a key individual of. They must already have the minimum qualification approved by the FSCA. They must already comply with the required class of business training. They must already be compliant with the CPD, and they must have operational ability. Product-specific training is not a requirement for a key individual unless this key individual is also appointed as a representative. But if this KI is not also a rep, they do not have to comply with product-specific training. Our fit and proper requirements of the rep, we have discussed them. So obviously, if this person complies with honesty and integrity but still has to comply with the rest, they're allowed to render services under supervision. So just to make sure that we know what a juristic rep is, we said for our juristic reps, financial soundness is a requirement. This is when our rep is not a natural person like you and me. Example, if we have RLP Financial Services, a brokerage that is appointed as a juristic representative for OUTsurance, RLP Financial Services is a juristic rep and must comply with financial soundness. But if we're going to appoint Pete as a rep for OUTsurance, he does not have to comply with financial soundness. He does have to comply with honesty and integrity. Right. So question. Mary, a competent rep of Finvest 12 Pty, is currently getting divorced from her husband. Mary has been caught hiding assets during this time for her own benefit once the divorce has been finalized. Which one of the following statements is correct? A. Mary no longer complies with honesty and integrity requirements and must be debarred. B. Mary still complies with the honesty and integrity requirements as this has no effect on her professional conduct. C. Mary no longer complies with the honesty and integrity requirements but will not be debarred. And then D. Mary must be reported to the authority. 3, 2, 1. Remember, honesty and integrity is a personal characteristic, not a professional characteristic. So what Mary does in her personal life on her own time outside of the walls of the FSP will have an effect on her honesty and integrity. And this is the question or the example that they like to use in the exam as well, because they know if they're going to use something extreme like Mary robbed a bank over the weekend, still in her personal life, in her personal capacity, on her own time outside of the walls of the FSP, then immediately would have said, no, she does not comply with honesty and integrity. But for some reason, when they use this example, the divorce example, people start to question it. It's still a personal characteristic. Okay, so don't be fooled. Okay, so I told you that we will be discussing the different entry-level requirements in this class. So an entry-level requirement, just to make sure that we understand it, is when we appoint a representative, someone that complies with honesty and integrity, but does not comply with competence. So they haven't started with their phase-related studies yet. This is still the minimum qualification that they need to be appointed in in the financial services environment that they'll be working in as a rep working under supervision. So remember that with category 2, 2A, and 3, that's always where we have the most strict rules for the appointment of representatives, for the rules of the FSB and all of that. So still, most strict rules for entry-level requirements as well. A supervised rep of a category 2, 2A, or 3 FSB must already have a recognized qualification, and it must be at degree level. So this means they will basically just work under supervision for experience requirements. Okay, and then they still need to do class of business training. They still need to do their product specific training, still need to do RE5, but they must already have the recognized qualification, which means this rep does not have 6 years to become competent. Okay, because they must already have that last qualification. They must already have the recognized qualification. So they will have 24 months to complete class of business training within the first 12 months, RE5 within the first 24 months, and then they've got the product specific training that needs to be done within 3 months after their appointment. And then whenever a new product is introduced to them, they need to comply with it again. Right. So strict rules for these guys. For the rest of them, not so strict. So a supervised representative of a category 1 FSP that will only be executing sales must have at least grade 10 or an academic achievement equivalent to grade 10. That's the entry level requirements. Then we appoint them under supervision and then they start their studies. A supervised rep of a category 1 or 4 FSP that will be providing intermediary services must have grade 12 or a qualification equivalent to grade 12. Then grade, we can appoint them under supervision and they can start with their studies, right? Important for the test. To just recap, maybe rewatch this part a few times. So in terms of the recognized qualification, we have qualification lists that they get published by the Commission or by the FSCA quite often, where they update any new qualifications that have been recognized. So if we have a qualification that is not yet recognized, but it does comply with the characteristics of a phased recognized qualification, then we can apply to the FSCA, and it's normally the representative with the qualification that will apply to the FSCA. The FSB can apply on their behalf, but the process is exactly the same. This qualification must provide the person with the relevant knowledge, abilities, and skills to understand their responsibilities of a person working in the financial services environment. The curriculum of the qualification must be quantitatively and qualitatively relevant to their functions, again, relevant to the financial services environment. And then we already know that for category 2, 2A, or 3 FSPs, key individuals, or reps, this must be at degree level. Our different REs are house. So we have RE1, RE3, 4, and RE5, and who has to write what. So representatives, the foundation of our house, always just RE5. Our outer walls, category 1 and 4, we also know the rules are not as strict with them. So for our FSP, if it is a sole proprietor, is only RE1, 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 RE1. Inside, chaos. For FSP, sole proprietor FSPs and key individuals, RE1 is always a requirement. That is RE1 for key individuals, so they have to have it. But they need an additional RE. So we take the 1 from RE1, we add our category number, and then we get the additional regulatory exam that they need to pass. So 1 plus 2 is 3. 1 plus 2, 3. With category 2A, it's still category 2, so that's why it's still 3. And then with category 3, we have 1 plus 3 gives us 4. All right. Just a recap on that, we discussed it in our workshop as well. For classes of business, you need to know the different classes of business. So you need to know all of them. You don't need to know exactly which product categories will fall under each of them, but you need to know all 9 of them. So you need to know that we have short-term insurance personal lines as its own class of business, short-term insurance commercial lines as its own class of business, long-term insurance as its own, pension fund benefits, short-term and long-term deposits, structured deposits, investments, forex schemes, and health services benefits. Okay, maybe we should write a little song or a rhyme for this. Let me work on that in the background. Our financial products, you have this in your book as well. So you need to know which products are financial products: shares, debentures, bonds, money market instruments, warrants or certificates, derivatives, securities, CIAs, long-term insurance, short-term insurance, pension fund benefits, friendly society benefits, foreign currency denominated investments, deposits, health services benefits, and crypto assets. Make sure that you do understand the description of it all. But in the exam, when they ask questions about this, they just ask, which of the following is not a financial product? So if you see an option there that does not include any of these, then obviously that's going to be the one that is not a financial product. Our tier 1 versus tier 2 products. So in the exam, they do like referring to a representative rendering financial services in respect of a tier 1 or a tier 2 product. And even though it doesn't really have an effect on your answer, if you do not understand all of the terms used in the question, you're going to freak out and not understand the question. Okay. So the difference between tier 1 and tier 2 products. A tier 1 product is normally a bit more complicated. So you'll see we have all of the we've got bonds and warrants and debentures and money market instruments here. So tier 1 products are complicated products. I remember it as tier 1, they win, they got the first prize, that's number 1, for being the most complicated. And then tier 2, they did not win, they came in second because they're not complicated enough. So these are our easier to understand products, and these are our more complex products. Okay, that's what we need to know about tier 1 and tier 2. So in the exam, when they say a representative appointed to render services in respect of a tier 2 financial product, then you know, okay, those are easier products. So whatever, the question will never be about the tier 1 and tier 2 product. They would normally just include it because it confuses you if you do not understand the question. Right, remember every and any trick to make sure that you do not pass the exam. Our experience requirements, you have them in your book as well. So experience requirements, we don't have a fixed time period anymore like we did before 2018. We now have different experience requirements depending on the subcategory of financial products that the representative will render services in. Um, go through them a few times. I wouldn't say memorize it. In the last two RE1 exams that I received, I did not get any question on this, but still just go through them, just familiarize yourself with them, and then just remember that when a representative is appointed as a Category 1 rep for advice and intermediary services, you don't add them together. You just use the bigger one of the two. Right. The same for our Category 2 FSPs. Here we have one column for minimum experience because Category 2 is not allowed to give advice, only intermediary services. Right. And then the maximum here you'll see is a 3-year supervision requirement period or supervision period requirement. For our compliance officer, what is the compliance officer appointed to do? Remember, no enforcement power. He cannot take away licenses, he cannot debar people. He monitors and he reports. Right. So our compliance officer must submit written reports to our FSP on compliance issues to our FSP. Do you see it? So the compliance officer does send the compliance report to the FSP. When they see any irregularities or suspected irregularities, they also need to report on that. And then they need to inform the commissioner of their own termination of services so that if they were going to submit a report to the FSCA of any irregularities, they can still submit that. All right. In terms of their monitoring function, what do? They have to try and identify any weak or vulnerable areas in the policies and procedures of the FSP. They need to make sure that compliance controls are effective and implemented successfully, and they need to test and review current systems. They need to conduct compliance visits within specific time frames, and this is basically what they will base their report on. After every visit, they will submit a report. So the visits also indicate the amount of reports they will submit in a specific time period. So if we have an internal compliance officer, so our compliance officer works at our FSB, internal compliance officer, and we're a Category 1 or 4 FSB, see, normally the ones that do not have very strict rules, our compliance officer must report annually on our branches, our units, and our premises, and annually on our representatives. If we have an internal compliance officer and we're a Category 2, 2A, and 3, then these reports have to happen quarterly. A bit more strict with the Category 2, 2A, and 3. If we have an external compliance officer, so it's not someone that works for the FSB, it's someone that is appointed, but they have their own compliance practice. They might be compliance officer for multiple FSBs. For Category 1 and 4 FSBs, we need a report on our branches, units, and premises quarterly, and on our representatives biannually. For Category 2, 2A, and 3, it's going to be monthly for both if we have an external compliance officer. Okay, remember this one for the exam. The calculation of CPD hours, we have a whole video on that as well. You will get a question. I actually think I have the question in here. This is also discussed in that CPD video. Here's the question. A representative that has to comply with 12 CPD hours per cycle was absent from work for 2 months during the CPD cycle. How many CPD hours does this rep have to complete? This is an actual exam question. Okay. Answer is B, 10 hours. Go back to the CPD calculation video and see if you can get to 10 hours. If you do not get to this answer, then please send us an email to info@RLP Training so that we can see where the hiccup comes in and how we can help you to resolve it. I don't want to do it now. I want you to go and calculate it and see whether you get to the correct answer. Right. Then our liquidity requirements, also NB for RE1. Liquidity requirements basically refers to our, I don't want to say cash flow, but basically just the financial soundness requirements of the FSB. And again, we have different rules for Category 1, 2, 2A, 3, and 4. And again, we will see that for Category 1 and Category 4, the rules are not as strict as for the middle ones. So our Category 1 FSB, our current assets must exceed our liabilities, okay, which means that basically our, let's say, equipment must exceed our loans. It's not 100% accurate, but it's just to paint a picture. And then our liquid assets must be equal to or greater than 4 out of the 52 weeks of our annual expenditure. So in the workshop, I'll also say to you that this is how I have memorized There we go. The liquidity requirements. I have it as 4, 8, 13, 13, 4. I've memorized this. So now when I get into the exam, I immediately go and write down 4, 8, 13, 13, 4, and then I know that's category 1, 2, 2A, 3, and 4. Right. Then category 2, our current assets must exceed our liabilities. Our liquid assets must be equal to or greater than 8 out of the 52 weeks of our annual expenditure. Category 2A, still, current assets must exceed liabilities. Here, our liquid assets will be or must be equal to or greater than 13 out of the 52 weeks of our annual expenditure, plus a little bit more. Our assets must exceed our liabilities by at least 3 million. So it's not just a requirement for it to exceed the liabilities, it must also now exceed it by at least 3 million rand. And then the same for our category 3. Current assets must exceed current liabilities. Liquid assets must be equal to or greater than 13 out of the 52 weeks of our annual expenditure. And again, our assets must be exceeded by our liabilities with at least 3 million. For category 4, that last requirement falls away again, and it's just current assets exceeding current liabilities, and we have the 4 rule again. Liquid assets equal to or greater than 4 out of the 52 weeks. Okay, so 4, 8, 13, 13, 4, and then the two 13s, that's when the 3 million also becomes applicable. With the 4 and the 8, 3 million not a requirement there. We also have early warning requirements, where it says that a category 1 FSP that collects premiums, a category 2, 2A, 3, and 4 FSP must report to the FSCA if their assets exceed liabilities by less than 10%. So they're compliant because assets do exceed liabilities, but it's by less than 10%. So it is compliant, but it's something to keep an eye on. Okay, it's an early warning that some things might go south or bad. Then if our current assets exceed current liabilities by less than 10%, so this was all assets and all liabilities, this one is current. If that's also by less than 10%, early warning. Just inform the FSCA so that they can keep an eye on that and have a plan in place if something goes bad. Then additional asset requirements exceed the minimum requirement by less than 10%. So for our category 2 and 3, where we have that 3 million requirement, if we do meet the 3 million requirement, but that 3 million is still less than 10%, that's also an early warning to the FSCA that something might go bad there. And anything else that is an indication that the financial soundness requirements might not be met, or there's a situation that will come up that will result in any of these scenarios, that must also be communicated to the FSCA.